The Water Bear, an epic science fiction adventure by Groucho Jones. Chapter 1. A Lightship to Aldebaran. The year 2075. The human historian Ophelia Box rode a lightship to Aldebaran, and so became the first of her kind to travel between the stars. The lightship was all she could hope for, and more, although the journey to reach it was less convincing. She'd boarded a civilian space shuttle at Kennedy Center, amidst the rusting gantries of the old American space program, after only a few hours' tuition. Everything seemed both horribly over and under-engineered. Rust was everywhere, rust and graffiti, like the set of a film that was never completed. "Your payload," they said, grinning. "Hold on tight and enjoy the ride." She held on very tight indeed. The solid rocket boosters separating after 2 minutes had terrified her. First, it felt like she'd stopped accelerating, and then a bright orange flash. She was sure the engines had failed, and they were at the start of a long fall to Earth, 50 kilometers below. The calm demeanor of the pilots and the mission controller's slow Texas drawl brought her back to her senses. She was no astronaut, that was for sure. Inside the shuttle was old. It looked like a ham radio set had been strewn round inside an American school bus. The array of blue screens below the letterbox windscreen was quaintly futuristic, like experimental sat-nav installed in a 1950s American car. Her watch had more processing power. Under acceleration, it boomed and shook like all its surfaces were made of tinfoil, while she was pushed down towards unconsciousness by an invisible hand. It was what it was, a mothballed machine called back into service like an old trooper drafted for a new kind of war. But it got her there. She'd watched the first lightships arrive 20 years before, as a skinny wee bairn, sweating in the warm night air outside her home on the wrong side of Aberdeen, when they filled the sky with their majestic aurorae. Aurora Galactinus, the BBC called it, the promise of hope for a future. There were rapturous street parties with techno doing rambunctious battle with the Proclaimers. That was before the Troubles, when the Six, Wu and Po, were still being feted as the saviors of humanity. Box still thought they were. That they saved us was indisputable. It was what came after that alienated so many. Paris, the abiding city of resistance. Liberté, égalité, humanité. She liked that slogan. It was the rallying call of the Parisian intellectuals. Finis les sondes. She liked that much less. Out with the probes. That was the cry of the mob. Probes was trash talk for the otherworldly Wu. Finis les sondes. Tuons les démons. She could still hear the ululating howl like wild animals in the streets. Thankfully, the mob had no idea who she was. Une collaboratrice. There were riots the day she closed her rooms at the university. Effigies were burned. People were dragged from their cars and beaten on suspicion. The Six diffused it in their usual way. A violent few found themselves repositioned sans Molotov cocktails to their homes or less convenient places. There would have been a few disgruntled would-be insurgents travelling home on the Channel Tube that night, costumed for anarchy, jeered by the England football supporters. The peaceable majority were left to protest unhindered. It was a lesson in effortless power. Now she was strapped in an American shuttle approaching an alien starship bound for Aldebaran. You don't say that every day. The lightship was small compared with the original Leviathans that had first delivered the climate factories now in geostationary orbit. It consisted of 2 unattached discs, about 100 meters across, about 100 meters apart. One of the discs was covered in circuitry. Lines of multicolored light crawled over its surface like random ideas, precursors of what was to come. Box mused that you could see it thinking. It was in that disc that the mathematical problem of the ship's spatial relocation was solved. The second disc was covered by vivid fractal designs. Up close, these resolved to ever smaller fractals. Box guessed down to the molecular level. Maybe they went on forever. You could rely on the Wu to be thorough. Her fellow shuttle passengers were mundane by comparison with the exquisite starship. In repose, they looked like any other humans. They looked like civil servants, which she guessed they probably were. They had luggage. This detail fascinated her. Ordinary suitcases strapped down with webbing in the shuttle's cargo bay. One of them had a multi-pocketed backpack made by a popular American sportswear manufacturer. Its sunburnt and bushy-bearded owner saw her looking and bared his white teeth. "Is he going to eat me?" she wondered. She smiled carefully back and reminded herself to lose the comedy shtick in case it came out her mouth. She didn't want to be exposed as a rube, away from home for the first time, or worse, a racist. The real problem was that sixes looked like any other human until they moved. Then they displayed an insectile suddenness that didn't quite scan as Earth normal. This six didn't have that insectile quality. He smiled and introduced himself. He was called Ito, he said, and he was the amanuensis of her employer, the regular of Threnody. "Oh, his secretary?" she asked. "More like a journalist," he said in an easy mid-Atlantic drawl. "I observe and interpret events." He was a compactly athletic man in his mid-30s by earthly appearance. He looked like he could climb a mountain or just had. Maybe his adventure backpack had been put to good use. "Oh," she said, "like a spy." He laughed. "Something like that," he said. She cursed herself as a fool. Of course, this healthy-looking outdoorsman was something to do with her mission, probably someone important. He smiled again and showed her how to propel her soft bags in the weightless conditions. She'd first met Alois Buss, her new employer, a week before in the Bistro Boffangere, an elegantly faded brasserie on the Rue de la Bastille. "You have a French name," she began idiotically. "You couldn't possibly pronounce my real one," he replied with a Gallic shrug. He was larger than life, almost 2 meters tall and theatrically charming to go with it. In his crumpled brown suit and unfashionable spectacles and his courtly manner, he was quintessentially Parisian. All he needed was a pack of Gauloises to complete the ensemble. He had that insectile tick going on. He told her he was the regular of Threnody, which he said was a minor functionary role, like being the ambassador of a small principality. "Like the mayor of Vaduz," he said, rolling his eyes disconcertingly before fixing them on her. He said, "I'm aware of your work." She experienced a frisson of concern. She was researching the PO, the secretive military third of the alien Troika. Was this the thought police? Was she about to be warned off? He said he could arrange access if she liked. He had a project if she was interested as a working historian in his personal employ. It could be hazardous, he said. She was never any good at factoring risk. "I'll do it," she said. Now she was falling headlong towards a translucent surface, like a ceiling made of soft crystal on which a crowd of people was gathered to meet the new arrivals. An invisible hand reached out and turned her, so her feet touched first. She landed halfway gracefully. For the first time since leaving Earth's gravity, her vestibular system pointed down. Some of her fellow travelers were greeted warmly. Ito was hugged fiercely by a teenage girl, who leapt with balletic grace from local gravity to catch him in midair as he debarked. So, they have family. Good. What was she expecting? Endless lines of birthing pods stretching towards an apocalyptic horizon? She cursed herself for having read too much sci-fi. Her bags landed softly beside her. "Welcome to Nyx." This from an androgynous person, a woo. She was like all her kind, eldritch and fair, with a slightly oversized head like an elf or a beautiful child. "I'm Char," she said. She beckoned Box towards a vertiginous space. Box didn't consciously follow, being frightened of heights, but a pulse in her back gave her no choice. Inside the disk was like inside a geode. Crystals crossed the open space like spearheads thrust through the side of the ship. The outer skin, which she knew to be covered with fractal designs, was transparent. Overhead, the battered American shuttle spun in graceful lockstep with the disk. Off to one side spun a more modern design, a Chinese X-wing lifter. 100 meters below her feet, across an intervening gap, she could see the pulsing circuitry of the drive disk, rehearsing its aurora galactinus. Below that, the Earth shone like a jewel in space, and beyond it the stars, her destination. Sixes floated in the open space and gathered on convenient surfaces. This ship was crowded and it was busy. No one paid her any attention. Her stateroom was the size of her entire Rupigal apartment, embedded within a crystal encrustation in the disk's outer rim, with a spectacular view of the Earth. Box spent her first hour watching it, still wired with adrenaline, unable to let go. There was gravity to her relief, and a glow that seemed to emanate from nowhere. After a long, restive come-down, during which she tried to make sense of the day's events, there was a chime, and she reached out with her mind to open the door. Standing there was the teenager who'd hugged Ito. "May I come in?" she asked. Box beckoned her in. "I'm Kitu," said the girl. "Ophelia, but please call me Box." "I'm instructed to call you Dr. Box," the girl said. "That'll work," said Box. "You have fiery red hair," said the girl, after a few seconds of industrial-grade staring, for more seconds and more industrially than would have been proper for strangers on Earth. "That's a rare mutation," she said brightly. "I'm told you're a fierce warrior." "I'm a kickboxer," admitted Box. "The Scottish champion," said Kitu. "A Scottish atom-weight champion," said Box. "I'm only wee." The girl beamed in reply. She was exceptionally attractive, with white blonde dreadlocks that hinted at bioengineering. Box had never seen dreads so healthy. "How old are you?" she asked. 16, said the girl. "Earth years?" "It's all the same," said the girl. "Can you explain that, please?" asked Box. "Our wetware mediates our speech," said the girl. "I hear what you mean." "Wetware being this neurocomputer in my head?" asked Box. The girl nodded. "Like some kind of universal translator?" asked Box. "More than that," said Kitu. "It works at the fundamental level of language. Your broker area interacts with mine." "Broker area," said Box. "That's impressive." The girl laughed. "I come from an advanced alien civilization," she said. Box had to laugh too. Kitu stood up. "We're about the same size, Dr. Box. Atom weights. Can we fight now?" A few minutes later, they were warming up in a gymnasium that the ship conjured up on Kitu's request, to Box's imagined design. It was like her first gym in Glasgow. There were canvas mats, a battered Muay Thai bag, and a full-sized ring. It even smelt right. Box showed Kitu how to use the kickboxing headgear, mouthguard, and gloves. The girl was a quick study and startlingly athletic. Box had fought Olympians who were slower. Soon they were sparring. Box soon struggled to keep up. "You're fitter than me," she said, breathing hard. "Let's slow down and I'll teach you to kick." The girl nodded. "There's no kicking in my art," she said. "I'm eager to learn it." Kitu proved equally adept at that, and after a few tries delivered a roundhouse kick that shivered the bag in its stirrups, and would have knocked an earthly opponent flat had it connected. "Okay," said Box, "you're definitely an alien." The girl laughed. "Now show me yours," said Box. The boxing equipment disappeared and was replaced by a soft, crystalline floor. "My fighting art is called Po," said the girl, "just as my people are called the Po. The first form of our art is called the geometry game." Kitu stood in front of her, relaxed. "The point of this game is to move to an irresistible position," she said. "It is based on Fibonacci spirals. The earth art it resembles most is Aikido." The girl took a step to the side and spun, and before Box could begin to process what had happened, Kitu was behind her, breathing lightly on her neck. "From here I could kill you," she said, "and there's nothing you can do about it." Box grimaced. "Teach me that trick," she said. Half an hour later, with the help of her wetware drawing rosy patterns in the floor, Box was dancing Fibonacci spirals. She learned that Po consisted of interconnected moves like a board game, but liquid and dynamic. Moves were related to moves like pieces to squares. Fibonacci spirals were countered by opposing Fibonacci spirals, always with the objective of outthinking your opponent. "This is excellent," said Box. "Your long-term training goal," said the girl, "is to be able to do this instinctively, without wetware." "You remember all this?" Repetition trains the animal brain, said the girl. Over time, it becomes programmed. You mean you practice a lot? Asked Box. Kitu nodded. 5 hours a day since I was 9, she said. You guys must be tasty in bar fights, said Box. It has been known, said the girl. The next 3 days were spent by the lightship transitioning to its departure location, with the sumptuous disk of Earth slowly receding and the silvery orb of Luna looming shockingly close, then falling behind. Box spent her time exploring the ship. Nothing seemed to be off limits. Her solicitous guide, who seemed to be the ship's only crew, was only a thought process away. When Box asked why they were moving so far before leaving, Char said that it was to be considerate neighbors. The light of my drive is as bright as a star, she said, better shone from a few light seconds away, with your moon in between. The internal fit and finish of the ship was superb, like a boutique hotel, and it was produced on demand. After Kitu showed her how, Box magicked up a pair of red Dali sofa lips and fresh flowers, and a bookcase piled with books for her stateroom. These began as grids of light, which interacted complexly until the finished objects appeared, like in a wireframe simulation. She picked up a Gutenberg Bible. It was perfect. This was better than a post-scarcity society. Here you could have anything. There was something puzzlingly non-Euclidean about the interior geometry of the ship. The geode was simple enough, although from some angles it seemed too large. However, the edges of the disk were all wrong, with corridors that curled more than they should. Box estimated that the space enclosed by her corridor could hold 2 of her rooms, and yet there were 10 stateroom doors. When asked about this, Char shrugged. Pnyx's topology is indeed mysterious, she said. Char showed her the drive disk. They reached it through an irising door in the base of the habitat disk. From inside the door there was no distance between the 2 disks, although 100 meters of separation was visible through the skin on each side. The drive consisted of hundreds of primary-colored geometric solids floating in the cylindrical space with lines of energy arcing between them. This system works by recalculating the positional attribute of all of the fundamental particles within its domain, explained Char. Location in physical space is a variable, just one of many possible solutions of the quantum wave function. Pnyx remembers where we wish to be, and then we are there. Box felt humbled, awestruck by the power of a machine that could think its way between the stars. It crackled and hummed like God's server farm. She imagined the quantum foam flowing like blood in its veins. Pnyx is the most advanced technology, said Char, discerning her mood. Given to us by a civilization called the Zap, who it is said can move through n-dimensional space-time using only their natural minds. Box had no reason to doubt it. Any of it. She felt her ingrained cynicism draining away. Why would a society that can do such things lie to us? We're primitives worshipping effigies of cargo planes. We don't matter at all. Char showed Box her personal space, which consisted of a contoured bed and a model of the ship like a cherished family heirloom, and soft crystal walls covered with celestial maps with long arcs showing their path through the heavens. Char sat on the bed and smiled and seemed perfectly happy with her life. As well you might be, thought Box. She tried not to cry. On the 3rd day, Box was invited to join Alois Buss, her employer and sponsor, and his travelling companions, to observe Lightfall and celebrate their departure from Earth space. With Buss was Ito, now clean-shaven, but still sunburnt, and a skittish Kitu who seemed unsure of who she was showing off to who. Buss had brought champagne. Dr. Ophelia Box, please meet Ito Nadolo, he said with a flourish, popping a cork. And Kitu Gorgonza, my court magician and his lovely assistant. We've met, said Box. You really caught the sun, she said to Ito. He stared back at her, then laughed. Utah, he said. The shipboard 6s seemed to have all lost their insectile expressions. Perhaps she was getting used to it. Perhaps it was an affectation for earthly consumption. The Poe, by contrast, based on a sample of 2, had a dreamy quality, as though they were only occasionally tuned into their local surroundings. Buss was dressed in his best Parisian costume, an oyster-grey suit with a lemon boutonniere. "Still playing the Frenchman, Alois?" Box said with a smile. Bus bowed, clicking his elegant heels. Ito was wearing a military-style uniform in plain black, elegantly cut. Pinned to his lapels were 2 carbon starbursts. Kitu was barefoot, in emerald green silk pajamas. The crowd gathered around them was dressed in a dazzling array of styles. Box watched a woman in a gown of floating hoops float past. An unseen band played earthly bossa nova. She felt like a frump in her shapeless NASA coveralls. Kitu must have seen her slight embarrassment and took her aside, and then to her cabin, which was a fraction the size of Box's stateroom, where she produced a small velvet package from which sprang a Baroque judo suit, calendared with curlicues of caramel and cream. "It's beautiful," said Box. "It's yours," said Kitu. "Please take it." "I couldn't," said Box. "Please," said Kitu, "I'll feel pleasure each time I see you in it." The luxurious suit was made from fibrous opalescent cloth, softly yielding to the touch, as light as spider silk. "Where did you get it?" asked Box. "On Earth," said Kitu. "You've been to Earth?" "I went with Ito to London to see a strange man," said Kitu. "Plenty of those in London," said Box with a wry smile. "This one seemed to know you," said Kitu. "Me?" Box asked. He said, "Take care of the Scottish woman." "Really?" Box asked. "What was his name?" "I can't say," said Kitu. "Secrets?" Box asked. Kitu nodded. "He said something else," said Kitu, "a message for you. I passed it as friendly. He said to tell you you're a feisty wee shite. I hope you aren't offended." Box just laughed. "Do you know who he is?" asked Kitu. "I might," said Box. From 100 meters, the Nix's Aurora Galactinus was nothing like the delicate light show visible from Earth. It began with swells and pools and gobbets of color, welling up through the drive disk circuitry, like a stormy sea of artist's paint. The colors became a vortex which flowed around the habitat disk until they were enclosed in a whirlpool of light. Inside the disk, floating balls of static energy appeared, and people's hair stood on end. Kitu, girlishly delighted, played with the balls on her fingertips. Box, a flute of French champagne in her hand, looked on in astonishment. The ship was quiet as a church. This was clearly a cherished event, even for jaded space travelers. Then the colors exploded and drifted away, leaving only the inky blackness of space and new stars, and a deep orange sun, Aldebaran. Between the ship and the star were a red planet and a lustrous white cube. Box knew from her assigned reading that Aldebaran was 44 times the size of the sun, and 425 times as luminous. So the skin of the Nix was not nearly as transparent as it seemed. She knew that the planet was the gas giant Aldebaran B, and that she was the first of her people to directly observe it. She shivered with the enormity of the idea. How can I even think about this? She christened it Ophelia. "Behold the Aldebaran orbiter," said Alois Bus with his signature flourish, encompassing the translucent cube, like a magician conjuring a rabbit. The main travel hub in this busy region of space. As if to punctuate his words, another Aurora Galactinus flowered in the space between the Nix and the planet, and where there was empty space now floated a second lightship. The party was soon back in full swing. Kitu danced an energetic salsa with a brown-skinned boy her own age, leading all the way, and doing so in great style, their deft feet skipping over the inky backdrop of space. Box was starting to discern more types of humans. Her initial assumption that they were all sixes might be misguided. She asked the ship about this. "The 1,000 worlds is a metaphor," said the Nix in her wetware. "There are about 3,000 worlds in this local civilization, give or take a few hundred in various states of transition. Of those, about 500 are of the cultural alignment called the Six, and those include many ethnicities. Some you might not immediately recognize as human." "How many here are sixes?" she asked. "Most of them are," said the ship, "because Earth is a six world." "We'll see about that," said Box. Ito asked her to dance, and he proved to be as skillful as Kitu. Dancing across the emptiness of space, with the red planet beneath her, at first proved too much for Box, and she was forced to ask the ship to show her a personal dance floor instead. Then she lost herself in the smoky rhythms of the music and asked for the heavens to be restored. Later, during a slower Puerto Rican number with the cosmos spread out beneath her feet, she asked Ito, "What are you going to call us?" "Call who?" he asked. "Earth's people," she said. "Sixes," he said. "You know that won't fly," laughed Box. He nodded. "In your space fiction, you're called Earthlings," he said. Box made a face. "Can I be a Poe?" she asked. He laughed. "You mean you honestly want to be a Poe?" "Yes, it's a serious question. Are you a closed society or an open one?" "We are inclusive," he said. "Our custom is that anyone who can breed with us can be a Poe by marriage." "Can I breed with you?" she asked. He laughed. "Is that a request or a technical inquiry?" Box snorted. "It's a technical question," she said. "No, we're incompatible," he said. "What, we're a different species?" she asked. "No one uses that meaning of speciation," he said. "I really can't be a Poe?" she asked. "Sadly not," he said. "You could be a Low," he said after they'd finished dancing and were sharing an Aldebaran-themed alcoholic drink with gobbets of sweet orange floating in a bitter smoky liquid. "Who are the Low?" she asked. "Our symbiont culture," he said. "What do they do?" "They fly our ships and fight beside us in battle," he said. "They're our brothers and sisters." "Are they like you?" she asked. Ito laughed. "They're different," he said. After a turn spent dancing with Kitu's young partner, who proved to be a divine dancer, and a turn with Kitu, who allowed Box to lead, she reclaimed Ito. "Ito," she said, "one last thing." "Yes?" "Please don't treat me like a fool." "I promise," he said. The orbiter grew, until a side of it filled her horizons, a gleaming white plane tens of kilometers across. Their companion lightship grew with it until it occupied most of the space between them and the orbiter. It was an open-ended cylindrical design, massively larger than the Nix. "A military design," said Bus, joining her near the Nix's exit vestibule. "The Wu have warships?" she asked. "Everyone has warships," said Bus with a shrug. He pointed out the circuitry exposed in the otherwise hollow cylinder crawling with strange energies. "Their drive is their weapon," he said. She shuddered. In the final moments before debarking, as the Nix slid into an irising void in the orbiter's side and her fellow travelers milled around the exit, she sought out Char. "Dr. Box," said the Wu. "Char," she said, "thank you and Nix. This has been a beautiful experience." "Thank you," said Char. "It was a great honor carrying the first of your people through space." "Char?" she asked. "Yes?" "Is Nix your lover?" Char looked at her and smiled. "Of course, isn't he the most beautiful lover?" "He's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," said Box. Char inclined her head. "Dr. Box?" "Yes?" "My people, we see things." "Yes?" "Be careful. Remember us here. When the time comes, we'll remember you." She looked back into the cathedral space, now empty of travelers, with its crystal buttresses and the orbiter's docking machinery visible through its transparent skin. "I will," she said. And then she crossed over.